What is the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you can't explain? Story 1. The basement in my dad's house is finished except for the storage room, which is really dark and creepy and is around the corner from the main room of the basement. And there's an elliptical down there. And when standing on the elliptical, if you look over your shoulder, you can see half of the door to the storage room. I was working out on said elliptical, and I felt like someone was standing behind me. So I looked over my shoulder, and in that half doorway, a dark figure with light gray eyes was standing there, looking at me. I was house sitting, so I knew there wasn't anyone else home. I slowly got off the elliptical and went into the bathroom to hide. Then a while later decided to be bold and rush past the storage room and back upstairs. Not the first time I had seen that gray-eyed figure either. Story 2. It wasn't what I saw, but what I heard. I lived down the street from our town cemetery. Me and my buddies would walk around on the paths in the cemetery. Every now and then I'd see a car in the cemetery when walking, but it was more or less always empty. One day, my three friends and I were walking up a small hill in the cemetery, and we all heard a knocking sound, exactly like someone knocking on a door. It was just one loud knock, 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 feet away from us, and then nothing. I looked at my friends, and we all asked if the other made that sound. None of us did and couldn't have. We were in the middle of a road, and the closest tree or grave was 15 to 20 feet away. We looked around at the houses, and no one was outside that could make the noise. It was creepy, and I have no idea how the sound was created. Story 3. I was riding my bike down a rural road when I was 9 and found a garbage bag filled with red sludge and white sticks. I thought it was blood and bones, but I had a very PG childhood and I had never even seen pretend blood and bones, so I had nothing to compare to. I told myself it wasn't what I thought it was. After all, why would there be a ripped open garbage bag filled with blood and bones? 2 days later, I thought, look again, and if it is what you think it is, tell a grown up. I biked back to the area and it was gone. I'm now old and have watched enough to confirm it was blood and bones. Story 4. Working in a nursing home for years during the night, and everyone always complained of weird stuff like noises on the top floor. I never believe in any of that, so I was always the one going upstairs to do night checks. One night I was changing a resident on that floor with a colleague, and my colleague complained he heard something like people walking. We were in the resident room, and I had to go to the cupboard at the end of that corridor to get bed sheets. And when I was coming back with the bed sheets, I kept hearing footsteps and like someone was touching and opening plastic bags. I was so annoyed and looked outside the room and saw a shadow passing the corridor. The issue is that the shadow was so big as if literally a person just passed by, along with step noises and plastic bags. I freaked out so badly and froze completely. I had to call another colleague to come upstairs because I was so scared of coming out of the resident room. Bear in mind that I do not believe in those things, and for 2 years, I was always the one doing night checks on the top floor and bottom floor on my own. Never had any problem and never saw something. Since that day, I never went upstairs alone and was always very scared. Story 5. My friend and I were driving from a gig we played in Kona on the big island of Hawaii. We were driving on Saddle Road, one of two roads from Kona to the other side of the island, to Hilo Town. Saddle Road is known for being a spiritual place and lots of weird things there. This stretch of land is about 40 kilo with no lights or population, just lava rock. We drove over the road about 1 a.m. We were talking stories and having a good time. Then we saw on the side of the road a huge white dog wearing a gold chain staring at us. We passed and asked if we saw the same thing. We were debating about stopping on the side of the road to pick it up. The local legend is that if you see an old lady on the road, you need to pick her up, or something bad will happen. We didn't stop and didn't speak until we got home. I asked another local guy what could have been. He said it was the goddess Pele's pet. Did some research. Looks like this dog has been seen sporadically since the 1950s. Story 6. My grandfather had just died a few days earlier, and my mom was crying one night in our kitchen, so I started hugging her. We had a lot of my grandfather's belongings, but there was this broken radio that didn't even have working batteries in it on the table, along with other things like photos and clothes he previously owned. This is the only unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. But while my mom was bawling and crying, the radio made a very loud static noise for about a second. We both stared in silence at it. It was eerie. She stopped crying because even she heard it. We both just went to bed after that and haven't spoken of it since. I'd imagine if it was something paranormal, it was my grandfather letting us know he's here, but who knows? Story 7. I was about to cross the street, and a lady put her arm across my chest and said, "Wait." As I look at her trying to figure out what is going on, a car crash happens, and one of the cars goes tumbling down the street 2 feet in front of me. If she hadn't stopped me, I would absolutely be dead. I turned to look at her again, and she is no longer there. I could see for blocks in each direction, know where she could have gone that fast where I wouldn't be able to see her. Only thing I can come up with is that I imagined it happening in my memory due to how tragic the crash was. Never experienced anything even slightly supernatural before or after. Story 8. I was maybe 10 years old and my grandma had just died. I didn't really know her because she had spent most of my young life in a nursing home and often didn't remember who I was when I went to visit. But when I visited, she would always rub my back. It was sort of like an instinctual comfort thing. She did it to all her kids and grandkids. For about a year after she died, I would be sitting in my room at night alone and start to feel someone rubbing my back like she used to. It freaked me out until one night when I acknowledged it and said, "Thank you, Grandma." It stopped after that, and I never felt it again. Story 9. I might have something for this. When I was young, probably around 10 or so, maybe younger, I was at a family wedding. It was late in the evening, so a full moon was out and it was getting darker. Me and my cousin, who is a year younger, were swinging on this big metal gate thing outside the venue. It was on the entrance to a very, very big field. We noticed a guy very far into the field who was just glowing and radiating white. I mean, his skin, clothes, everything. I remember us standing there like, what the heck? Then we tried to get his attention and shout at him. He stopped looking in our direction, but he stopped right under the full moon and pointed up towards the moon while staring at us. We were just in shock and confusion. After about 10 seconds of pointing, he carried on walking across the field and just disappeared behind a swing set. Even till this day, I have no idea what that was. I'm hoping it was some costume or something, but sure it didn't look like it. Story 10. About 25 years ago, my now former wife and I were taking care of a house. We had been there for several weeks, and we both noticed that we always had that feeling coming up the stairs from the cellar that something was going to grab you as soon as you turned the light switch off. Everything else about the house was normal. We slept with an analog wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you move a tiny third hand to the location on the clock face for the desired time. For example, halfway between 6 and 7 to awaken at 6:30. It's a physical process, and there is very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us up at 6 a.m. It was not something we fiddled with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm clock went off at like 2 in the morning. Old school ringing bells. Both my former wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure, maybe 2 feet tall, run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy until my former wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, we saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. That's the whole story. Have no explanation for it. Nothing else ever happened there. But the cellar feeling persisted. Story 11. I had a dog growing up that was the smartest dog I've ever met. She was like a human trapped in a dog's body. My brother and I found her wandering around our neighborhood after school, and we brought her home. She was beloved. My brother died young. After he died, she would walk slowly in a circle around a plant we had in the living room, letting the leaves that hung down gently rub her back. Every once in a while, she would stop and look up at the plant for a moment, like she saw some kind of apparition floating above the plant. She would get a sad look in her eyes and let out a whimper. I'm convinced she was seeing my brother's ghost watching over us. I really love that dog. Story 12. It's not scary, but unexplainable. When I was 10, I got into a motorcycle accident. I wasn't driving it, I was walking from school when a motorcycle hit me going full speed. I did see the motorcycle come, but I froze up and couldn't move. When it had hit me, I flew pretty far and remember someone catching me when I fell down. When I got up and looked around, I didn't see anyone, and witnesses told the cops. I flew at least 6 feet and fell headfirst on the ground. My head was fine, just had a broken collarbone. Thankfully, my parents believed me when I told them. Story 13. Around 2003, I was walking home from work in the afternoon and just happened to look up on an overcast day. Parallel to my direction, a meteor burned up, led by a bright burning and leaving black smoke across the whole sky. It made a low-pitched, loud rumbling across the whole sky for the 3 seconds it took to travel that far. Before YouTube, no one would have believed me, much less heard of anyone who saw it. In hindsight, it was wicked cool to see. At the time, I thought I was going to die. I had seen meteor showers. I had never seen one that low or with any volume. Story 14. I was once driving on a crowded freeway in the middle of the afternoon. This freeway went through the center of my hometown, and there's a part that goes up and over a hill with a fairly steep incline to the point when you're going up that section, you're looking at the sky over the peak of the hill. I've taken this freeway and gone over this section 1,000 times. On this day, I'm making the trip again and beginning the ascent when it happens. The sky flashes white. It's the flash of a computer rebooting itself, and you could see almost like grid lines in the sky. Then it was gone. The sky was back to normal. I freaked out, but looking at the drivers around me, nobody else seemed to have noticed it. To this day, I wonder if I really did see a glitch in the Matrix. Story 15. As a kid, there was a camp that had a lean-to and an old plywood caravan against it a long way out in the Alice bush from the town I grew up in. One school holiday, my friends and I went for a bushwalk and stumbled across it. Didn't look like anyone had been there in months, and we looked in the van. Nothing much but moldy seats and a built-in table. Usual old caravan stuff, so we shut the door because it smells moldy. As we sat in the shade of the lean-to, we heard the doorknob squeak and start turning. Pretty sure my backpack is still sitting there 35 years later because I dropped it and ran. We all scattered in different directions and met up lower down the road an hour later, and we were all still pale. No way anyone was in that van. No way. Still bothers me to this day. Story 16. I used to go night running pretty late, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., up a valley near my house. At one point, the road I run on goes through an area with cemeteries on both sides and an abandoned Japanese Shinto temple nearby. One night during a run while I was running between the cemeteries, I saw an old Asian lady standing by a bus stop. She said hi in a very slow and deliberate manner and waved at me. I nodded and smiled at her and kept jogging. My turnaround point was about 5 minutes past the bus stop, but when I turned around and ran back the way I came, the woman was gone. No cars or buses had driven past me in either direction, and I didn't see her walking anywhere. She was there when I ran up the road, and she was gone 5 minutes later when I ran down the road. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but later I realized the whole situation seemed very strange. Why was she there so late at night? Where did she go? I still get a chill up my spine remembering the odd way she said hi and waved at me, and needless to say, I changed my running route shortly after that. Story 17. There was this abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, like 30 minutes of back roads to find it, and no other people for at least 10 miles in any direction. Me and some friends used to go check out this spooky house and show it off to one or two new folks at a time. We did this 3 or 4 times, and as we're pulling up one night, a light in the house turned on. The house didn't have power any time we'd been there, and there were no vehicles anywhere around the house that night. Scared us all to the point none of us ever went back. In retrospect, it was probably being used as a hunting cabin or meth house, although there was never any indication of either that we saw, and they probably just had the breaker off when they weren't there. A car could have been parked behind in a place we couldn't see from the road, but as high school kids, nope. Spooky house with unexplained lights. Story 18. When I was about 7 or 8, I had a rope swing in my backyard. I was obsessed with it and would play on it for hours. One day, just like any other, I was swinging on it, and out the corner of my eye, I spotted an animal. At first, I thought it was a squirrel, but as I turned to look at it, it was much bigger and darker than a squirrel. So I figured it was a stray cat. But as I watched it walk across the yard, it wasn't a cat. It was something I'd never seen before. It was all black. It had the head of a badger, but the body of a squirrel. It was about 2 feet in length and the height of a small dog. I got a little spooked because I figured it was a rabid animal, so I got off the swing and backed away. That's when, in all seriousness, I watched this mystery animal run towards the fence and run right through it. Leaving a hole or damage to the fence, it just phased right through. I sat in awe for a good 3 minutes before I slowly walked inside. Story 19. Was driving home with my family late after a day of skiing. My father likes to drive too fast for the weather, and it was just starting to snow heavily. We hit a patch of black ice, spinning us out and sliding us towards what would be a 30 to 40 foot, almost vertical drop down into a wood line. Before we reached the drop-off, the area between the front and rear passenger side door completely crumpled enough to where we could see outside, stopping us on the shoulder of the road. Weird part is that when we went out, there was nothing there to hit. No guardrails, no street signs, nothing. The even stranger part is that it did not feel like a crash. I have been in some. We went from 65 miles per hour to dead stop with the force of what feels like pulling into a parking space. No jolt, no bangs, just spinning, then immediate stop. Another foot, and we would have been over the edge and likely dead. When we looked at the car, it looked like what I'd expect to see in an Avengers movie if Iron Man put his hand out to stop the car. It's really hard to put in words, but I'm convinced a higher power stepped in. Story 20. When Grandpa died, almost all the family was with him around him in the bed. He was 98, and we were waiting doctors because he was suffering. In the night table, we put some candles. Just a few seconds after he died, the candle's flames started burning so intense. The height was like 10 times bigger. It was like 10 seconds before the flame came back to normal size. I don't know if it was the soul of Grandpa leaving the body that acted like some kind of combustion. I don't know. But it was weird and with no explanation. All my uncles saw it, but no one talked about it after that. Story 21. When I was about 24 or 25, I stopped off at a CVS relatively late at night. On my way inside the store, the parking lot was pretty much empty, but when I came back out, a strange-looking woman was standing in the parking lot. She had this creepy, weird grin on her face and black eyes. I don't mean bruising around her eyes, rather, it looked like her eyeballs were made of pure onyx. She just didn't seem human in a way. She stood near my car, watched me get inside, start the engine, etc. She didn't speak to me or try to come closer or anything. She just stared with that freaking weird grin and those black eyeballs. If it had been remotely close to Halloween at the time, then maybe I could have found a way to dismiss it. But it happened in May or June of that year, so I have no idea what was going on. Story 22. 2 days after my wife passed in 2021, my kids and I were sitting in our living room watching South Park, which she hated. It was the episode where the boys are trying to build a stair or ladder to heaven to get something back from Kenny's dead butt. The episode had Alan Jackson in it, my wife's favorite singer from her youth. Anyway, we're sitting there in Life 360 on Men, and both the kids' phones go off. Mom had left home, except her phone was on the counter in the kitchen. I thought it was just a weird glitch till I saw the location was the home of one of her Girl Scouts, a little disabled girl who my wife adored. I guess she wanted to go visit her one last time. It stayed there about 10 minutes and then arrived back at home and never did anything like that again. Story 23. I was on a cruise with a friend. We shared a cabin. Friend was a really loud snorer. He would usually stay awake until I'd fallen asleep, otherwise I'd find it impossible to sleep with the racket he was making. That night, he'd had a few drinks and passed out drunk, snoring loudly. Didn't bother me as I had my book to read. It's about 2 a.m. and I'm wide awake, reading my book in bed. I get this feeling that there's something at the foot of the bed. I glance up, and there's this thing. It looks like a person, but translucent and gray, and the features are blurry. A bit like if a person was made of television static. I feel as if it is being inquisitive, like how a young child would watch you do something. I asked it in my head what it wanted, and as I did, it turned and walked across the room to the door. As it did, it disappeared. I didn't feel scared or threatened by it. No idea what it was. I don't drink or take drugs, so it wasn't that, and I was wide awake. Odd. Really odd. Story 24. When I was a kid, my grandpa was the night shift custodian of a big old school church building. My sister and I used to go with him some nights because they had a big gymnasium type room with a ton of big exercise balls and stuff, and it was fun to run around. One night while my grandpa was locking up a room, my sister and I heard a noise down the stairs behind us. We looked and there was an old lady leaving the building. She turns, looks at us, does the shh motion with her finger to her lips, and leaves. We don't think too much of it at the time. We go to my grandpa and ask him if there was anyone else here tonight, like any meetings, classes, etc. And he says, nah, it's just us in the entire building. We ask him where the door down the stairs leads, and he says, oh, that goes out to the cemetery. My sister and I freaked out. We still talk about it to this day and have the same memory of it. Story 25. My best friend and I would always talk about crazy dreams we had. Never thought much of it until he told me about one where he got hit by a car and died. We were about 15 or 16 when he told me about the dream. We were into conspiracies, stuff like aliens, paranormal, lucid dreaming, so we'd talk about stuff like that a lot. And he died right before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard wearing all black when the car hit him and could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at his funeral and laughed about it. He just kept going on about how it was so real and it really shook me up until eventually I forgot about it. Then, a few years later, after I'd long forgotten about the dream he told me about, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral. He did get hit by a car and died. He was wearing all black, like in the dream, his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. It was all true. I still don't know what to make of it all. Every single detail I remember from his dream came true, and I'm sure there's parts of it he told me that I don't remember. I felt crazy. I didn't tell anyone about it. I just don't know why or how he saw it happen in his dream. And think, what if he never told me about it? It just left me with so many questions, but I guess now I have proof, at least to myself, that our souls go on after we die. I just wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it. Like, there had to be some kind of reason. I just think about how I wouldn't believe this story if I hadn't experienced it for myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar?